Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So I wanted to react to this Piers Morgan interview with female athlete, female powerlifter, April Hutchinson, who has been forced to compete against a biological male, Anne Andreas, in the powerlifting competition. This is out in Canada. I've covered this story on the channel before. And Anne Andreas has no problem dominating women's powerlifting, even mocking female athletes at one point. So April is dealing with this at the moment. She's standing up for women's sports, standing up for women's powerlifting in Canada, and she's explaining what she's had to put up with since this began. So let's take a look.
Well, a week ago, I interviewed two former angling stars who quit the England women's team over a transgender teammate they thought had an unfair advantage. The sport's international governing body has now ruled that male-born competitors cannot take on women because their physical power gives them an unfair advantage. So some common sense, again, prevailing in the world of women's sport. But the fight continues in many other women's sports. Canadian powerlifter April Hutchinson has taken a stand against trans women in her sport, facing a backlash for doing so. Well, now a video has emerged of her rival, Anne Andreas, a male-to-female trans athlete who holds the women's record in Canada, appearing to mock women for being weak.
Why is women's bench so bad? I mean, not compared to me. We all know that I'm a tranny freak, so that doesn't count. And no, we're not talking about Mackenzie Lee. She's got little T-Rex arms and she's like 400 pounds of chest muscle, apparently. I mean, standard bench in powerlifting competition for women, I literally don't understand why it's so bad.
Well, Team Canada powerlifter April Hutchinson joins me now. Well, welcome to Piers Morgan. Thank you for coming into the studio. Anne Andreas, who is a biological male who's transgendered, currently holds 4 of the 5 provincial records, the highest deadlift of all ages in Canada. If Anne Andreas competed with males, then she would place around 6,000. Right there is the inequality, the unfairness that we're seeing in many sports, but particularly a sport like yours.
Well, at least the women that you say are so bad, they rank in the top upper tiers of the sport, probably in the top 10. That's how they're at the level that they're at. When they're competing against their sex, they rank very highly. But when you have to compete against your sex, funny that you can only get, ranked 6,000. So again, you mean to tell me that there's no unfair advantage? You mean to tell me that there's no incentive for these guys to identify as a woman? Now they can be something in sports. Achievements that they were unable to attain while competing against their own sex.
Yeah, so you have powerlifting, which is a pure strength sport. Males have an advantage of 60 to 70% advantage over females. You hear Anne talking about the bench press. Why is bench press so weak for females? We're not designed for bench press. We don't have the right muscle mass for a bench press. So therefore, we will be weaker.
Exactly. Men are more muscle on top, whereas women are more fat on top. So by default, who is going to have an easier time when it comes to bench pressing, when it comes to testing the strength of one's chest muscles, is obviously going to be men. This is just common sense. So that's why when women compete against other women, it's fair because we are all in the same boat. We can build as much muscle as we can build as women, but we can't build as much muscle as men.
When you hear her mocking, really, the whole situation, how does that make you feel?
I mean, it's the whole thing is disgusting. It's disgraceful. It's disheartening. It's even more disheartening that the Federation allows this to happen. I am the one being punished for speaking truth, yet he can mock females and say, call me a bigot, incite hate, and nothing's being done about that. But I'm the one being silenced by my Federation.
What is going to happen to you?
Well, most recently, I've been threatened with suspension. 2 weeks ago, I received a letter from my Federation stating that you cannot call Anne a biological male. That goes against the code of ethics. Because in their policy, they do ask.
They've literally made the term biological male into hate speech. Biological male is a scientific term, it's fact. That's what Anne is. Just like if you look at somebody and say this person is a man, this person is a woman, that's not hate speech, that's just stating fact. But now, unless you speak their language, which isn't rooted in reality, you're a bigot. So no matter how much synthetic hormones Anne takes, that's not going to change the fact that Anne is a biological male, just like the people who Anne is competing against are biological females. It's interesting how the term biological female, when you're talking about natural born women, isn't offensive, isn't hate speech, it's fact. But now that we have to validate people's identities, it turns into hate speech and the facts don't matter anymore. When did we get to this point where facts are offensive? Because it doesn't validate somebody's identity, it's therefore offensive. You can still acknowledge the facts and be kind to people. You can still acknowledge the facts and not be hateful. But now they're making the very facts in themselves hateful. Take it up with biology. Don't punish female athletes because they're stating fact. They're the ones who have to compete against these people. They've been competing in women's sports from the very beginning. And all they're doing is trying to preserve the integrity of their sports, the fairness of their sports. And they work very hard. April looks amazing. The average woman doesn't look like that because April works at it. To get the upper body strength, to reach that level, she has to work very hard. We don't naturally have the testosterone to build muscle as easily as men do. So she has to work extremely hard to get to where she is. But Anne Andreas doesn't. Anne Andreas doesn't have to work as hard. Anne Andreas can be mediocre and still become a record holder, multiple records, still win multiple championships when competing against women. That's not fair. And no amount of offense that people choose to take on is going to change that fact.
Ask that we use pronouns. They don't force you to, but they ask. Also,
But she is a biological male. I mean, I'm perfectly prepared to call her Anne, her name that she'd prefer to be called. That's fine. But she's a biological male, a transgender athlete who's now destroying female competitors in women's sport. I mean, to me, again, but particularly in this powerlifting, it's so obvious that if someone would come 6,000 competing against men, but is winning against women, there's the problem.
exactly. Now, just recently, the Strongman Corporation in Canada, we spoke out against, they had a transgender athlete. They actually changed their policy to create a separate category.
Right.
So simple. And that's all we've been asking is for a separate category.
To me, it's very simple. What should happen is you either compete against your biological sex. So if you're a trans woman, you would compete against biological males, as most of them have done before in sport.
Interesting that the open category in swimming was cancelled recently because no one turned up. Leah Thomas apparently isn't interested in the open category. Leah only wants to compete against females. And that's what we're seeing now. These trans athletes, they want to compete against females. That's the only thing that's going to validate them. That's the only thing that's going to give them what they want. Is to be in female spaces, is to compete against females. They don't want the open category. They want the spot that women have because that's how they identify, apparently. What's wrong with racing or competing against other trans athletes? What's wrong with that? Are you not proud of your identity?
Massively less successfully, it should be noted, or you have a completely new category.
Easy peasy. Yeah, you'd think it'd be that easy. But
yes, and
yes.
because there are far more people now identifying as men or women, different to their biological sex, these categories would be quite well, I would imagine, well stocked with people, right? There'd be lots of people wanting to do it.
No, exactly. Yeah. Well, my federation actually, I think they've gone rogue. They've done their own thing. They've created an inclusion policy. So you could identify as a female tomorrow, Piers, take all the records, crush it in the women's category, and then go back to being a man the next day.
That's what Ari Silverman did to make a point. And he made a very good point. He literally walked into the competition for the bench press and broke the women's record. Now, it was unofficial, but still, he made that point. Anybody can do that. If you want to be somebody in sports, compete against women. If you're a man and you want to be somebody in sports, you can't do better than 6,000, just compete against women.
I mean, that's something Martina Navratilova said very early on, and she was accused of being a bigot. One of the biggest LGBTQ advocates probably ever in sport. She was accused of being bigoted. I mean, this is the sort of I don't know what you would call it, but it's the instant reaction every time anyone in your position or Martina or whatever, they raise a concern about this obvious unfairness, if I would call it cheating. I mean, just it's cheating.
Yes.
To me,
is
it has the
cheating.
same effect as doping, right? In the sense it gives somebody an unfair advantage. We all know this.
The way they've treated Martina is proof that being called a bigot doesn't mean anything anymore. Because you would take somebody who clearly isn't and label them that just to hurt them, just to discredit them, because you don't like what they're saying. You don't like the truth that they're telling. So the term bigot, various phobes, means nothing now. And the activists are the ones who've invalidated those terms. So congratulations. Martina was trained by a trans athlete. One of her best friends is a trans athlete. So where's the bigotry?
In the 1970s, Navratilova played against Renee Richards, one of the first professional athletes to identify as transgender. After Richards retired, she coached Navratilova to 2 Wimbledon titles.
What do you make of the fact that we are having the same conversation? You are in the center of a conversation that you were in, I think it was 40 years ago, and we're having it again today.
Look, I was very welcoming of Renee, and I thought it was great. But she had the reassignment surgery. She lived as a woman for a long, long time, and there was no doubt in our minds that she's a woman. At the same time, had she started beating us, I don't know if I would have felt the same way. Because as a man, Renee wasn't even ranked top 100, but as a woman in her 40s, she was in top 30 and on the women's tour. And I had my hands full with her when I played against her. We also played doubles together. Then she became my coach. But now I think it's clear we need to have a blanket rule so that people know where they stand and they can prepare properly. By the way, Renee Richards agrees with me on this, that she probably shouldn't have been allowed to compete 40 years ago. Looking back, she had an advantage. She knows that. And maybe it wasn't that big a deal again because she didn't start winning tournaments. But now she's totally agreeing with the position that I'm taking. And it'd be hard for people to call her transphobic, right?
And this trans athlete, I think it's Renee, has actually said now competing against biological females was wrong. So I would say don't be afraid to speak truth for fear of being labelled, because these labels have been overused now for people who they clearly do not apply to as well.
It gives somebody an unfair advantage. We all know this, but people like you, brave enough to put your head over the parapet, you get shot down and called bigoted, transphobic, and so on.
Well, exactly. I mean, I've been called that word I don't know how many times now. It's not transphobic to ask for fairness in women's sports.
Right.
It's a word they use to silence you. Well, I'm not going to be silenced.
Do you have any problem with transgender people?
No, not at all. Not at all. I have a problem with transgender athletes going into women's sports, or AKA biological men, taking women's podium spots, sponsors.
Because that's when it infringes upon women. That's why if you're an activist and you're advocating for that, Megan Rapinoe, you're advocating for biological males to infiltrate women's sports, you're not for women. You're not for female athletes. You can't have both.
And you never see it the other way around with trans men.
Exactly.
Of course not.
It doesn't happen because trans men actually have an inferior disadvantage when they compete against biological men. Obviously, because they're biological females. So there's a reason, I always say there's a reason the Olympics, you split the genders up. If you didn't, if you made it gender neutral
in
next
any sport,
Olympics, women would win about 2 gold medals if they were lucky in the entire tournament.
Well, there's a reason why there's categories. I'm in the Masters, so I compete between 40 and 50 years old.
Yeah.
There's people from 50 to 60. There's juniors. Like I could identify as a junior tomorrow and go crush the juniors.
Right, exactly. And if you had to compete in your category of 40 to 50 Masters against only biological males who identified now as women but had competed in powerlifting in that category,
chance.
How would you get on?
Oh, well, I think the answer's for itself, not well. So
I mean, you would.
Even Serena Williams has said, she's so happy being a female and doing female sports, competing against other women. And she said it's completely different, women's tennis and men's tennis. Andy Murray was joking about competing against her and she was like, don't be silly, you would crush me. And that doesn't mean that she's inferior. It just means she's different. She's built differently because she's not a man. And the fact that we have categories in sports is proof that this whole allowing biological males to compete against women due to identity is ridiculous. There's not even an argument. you don't have a leg to stand on because we have categories in sports. And those categories, the need for those categories doesn't go away because of somebody's feelings. It doesn't go away because of somebody's so-called identity. It doesn't. This simply incentivizes cheating. And all these governing bodies, these sporting organizations are enabling this. And lastly, I cannot believe the way these female athletes have been treated. Just for saying that they want their sports to remain fair. They have been harassed, they have been abused, they have been threatened, they have been gaslighted. It's absolutely disgusting.
Wouldn't win anything, right?
No, nothing.
So your chances of being able to be successful in your sport are massively eroded simply because people with an unfair physical advantage have come along and decided they want to be you.
Exactly. And this particular person, Anne, I mean, he's taken records that basically people that have been training for 10 years haven't even touched a number. Like a deadlift of 573 pounds is unheard of, especially by a 40-year-old.
Are you going to sue the federation?
Well, I do have an attorney that's in the works right now. I do have to respond to their letter of disciplinary, but it is in the works, yes. And I'm actually raising money right now for legal fees to pay the lawyers.
I think it is ridiculous that people like you are put through this hell for spelling out the bleeding obvious. Yes. I do think it's ridiculous. And we keep hammering this on this program because I think most right-minded people know how ridiculous it is and how unfair it is. But thank you for coming in. I wish you good luck. And we will keep hammering this drum until common sense prevails in every sport.
Yes, for sure. And I just want to give you this as a gift because it is Women's History Month in Canada.
Ah!
So I made this shirt for you.
Keep female sports female.
Let's make this global as well.
You know what? I will happily endorse that T-shirt because they should be.
Good to hear that she's fighting back. She's taking legal action. I think there's going to be a lot of lawsuits. This is literally destroying the careers of women. It's derailing their careers when they should have been the ones obtaining these records that they worked hard to achieve. But it's literally being stolen from under their feet by these biological males. So I'm really happy to hear that she's taken legal action. I totally support her in that. She's fighting for the female athletes, you know, of her generation, but also of the next generation, the younger athletes who are coming behind her. This is something that she should be enjoying. As someone in her 40s, trains hard, and has achieved so much, she should be enjoying that now. But it's being infringed upon, unfortunately. So we have to put a stop to this. Canada is like one of the worst when it comes to this sort of thing, from what I'm seeing. But with people like April, you know, we're going to see great progress, I have no doubt. People like Riley Gaines, all these female athletes who are now standing up for women's sports. You know, it does give me hope. It is encouraging. So, you know, I commend them and wish them all the best. So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves, and God willing, I will see you in the next video.